Ever wonder what made someone a good wife in medieval times? Would you pass the test by medieval standards? Number 11. Keep your husband's secrets. Did you know that medieval wives were basically expected to be their husband's personal vault? Yep. That's right. In medieval times, a good wife never, ever shared her husband's secrets or private matters with anyone, not even her besties. This wasn't just about gossip, either. Medieval marriage manuals and conduct books specifically instructed women that loyalty meant keeping your husband's business confidential, whatever it was. The famous medieval text, How the Good Wife Taught Her Daughter, a real 14th century poem BTW, literally warned women that sharing their husband's private matters could destroy their marriage. Picture this. You've just found out something juicy about your medieval hubby's business dealings, but you literally cannot tell a soul, or you'd be considered a terrible wife. Even if your husband was involved in something sketchy, you were expected to keep that info locked down tight. The whole ride or die mentality. Totally medieval. Kings and nobles especially valued this quality because their wives were often privy to political secrets that could literally change the course of history if leaked. Imagine the pressure. Medieval society considered a woman who couldn't keep secrets as dangerous and untrustworthy, potentially threatening not just her marriage but her entire social standing. Talk about pressure to keep quiet. Number 10. Manage the household economy wisely. Think running a household budget is tough today. Try doing it in medieval times without spreadsheets, banks, or calculators. A medieval good wife was basically expected to be a financial wizard. She managed all the household resources, tracking every penny, or rather every farthing and shilling. This wasn't just about making grocery lists either. Medieval wives, especially in merchant or farming families, were responsible for budgeting the entire household economy, often making decisions about storing grain for winter, preserving food, making clothing, and managing servants if they were wealthy enough to have any. The medieval household was literally a small business, and the wife was the COO. She needed to know exactly how much food to preserve for winter, how to stretch supplies during lean times, and how to make sure nothing went to waste. A good medieval wife knew how to spin wool, brew ale, bake bread, preserve meat, make candles, and 100 other practical skills that kept the household running. Text like Le Ménager de Paris, a real medieval housekeeping manual written in the 1390s, gave detailed instructions for wives on everything from managing servants to getting wine stains out of tablecloths. In wealthier households, this meant supervising staff and tracking significant expenses, while in poorer homes it meant doing everything herself. Either way, her thriftiness could make or break the family's fortunes. A wife who couldn't manage resources was seen as a disaster that could literally drive a family into poverty and starvation. Medieval husbands were often away from home for long periods, especially merchants or nobles, which meant wives were essentially running the entire show on their own much of the time. Number 9. Be modest in dress and behavior. Would your Instagram maifs get you in trouble in medieval times? You bet. Medieval society was obsessed with a wife's modest appearance and behavior. A good wife was expected to dress appropriately for her social station, not too flashy, not too colorful, and definitely not revealing. This wasn't just about fashion preferences either. Medieval sumptuary laws actually regulated who could wear what colors and fabrics based on their social class. A merchant's wife caught wearing silk trimmed with fur could face legal penalties. Church sermons regularly warned women about the sins of vanity and how immodest dress could lead to moral corruption. The 15th century text, the Book of the Knight of the Tower, included cautionary tales, specifically for young women about the terrible fates that befell ladies who dressed too provocatively or wore excessive makeup. Modesty extended beyond just clothing, too. A good wife was expected to speak quietly, laugh discreetly, never loudly, and move with grace and restraint. Public behavior was carefully scrutinized. A wife's reputation could be damaged by something as simple as walking too quickly through town or making too much eye contact with men who weren't her husband. Medieval conduct books advised women to keep their eyes downcast in public and to speak only when necessary. Can you imagine living under that kind of constant social surveillance? Even wealthy noblewomen, who could afford luxurious clothes, were expected to demonstrate their virtue through modest styles and subdued colors, saving their finery for appropriate occasions. Medieval people genuinely believed that external appearance reflected internal moral character, so a modestly dressed wife was assumed to be virtuous, while a flashy dresser was automatically suspect. Number 8. Be faithful and chaste. Think, double standards are bad now. Medieval wives faced some seriously uneven expectations when it came to fidelity. While medieval husbands often got away with extramarital affairs, especially noble ones, a wife's faithfulness was considered absolutely non-negotiable. Adultery by a wife was one of the most serious social transgressions possible in medieval society, often leading to severe punishment, public humiliation, or even death in extreme cases. This wasn't just about emotional fidelity either. Medieval medical and religious texts were obsessed with female sexuality and controlling it. The medieval church taught that wives should be sexually available to their husbands. Refusing was actually considered sinful, but should never, ever enjoy it too much. Yes, really. Medieval medical texts like those by Hildegard of Bingen described women with strong sexual desires as morally and physically unhealthy. The infamous scold's bridle, a metal cage placed over a woman's head with a piece that went into her mouth, was sometimes used to punish wives considered too outspoken, including those suspected of sexual impropriety. Even a wife's friendships were scrutinized for potential impropriety. Being alone with a man who wasn't a relative could ruin a woman's reputation instantly. In noble households, wives were often surrounded by attendants, partly to witness and protect their virtue. The obsession with female chastity was so extreme that medieval literature is filled with stories of wives proving their faithfulness through elaborate ordeals. The 13th century Romance of Tristan shows Queen Isolde walking across red-hot plowshares to prove her fidelity, despite her actually having an affair with Tristan. Talk about toxic relationship expectations. Number 7. Be skilled in textile arts. Could you survive in medieval times without your Amazon Prime wardrobe deliveries? Medieval good wives were expected to be textile magicians, capable of transforming raw materials into everything the family needed. Spinning, weaving, sewing, and embroidery weren't just cute hobbies. They were essential daily tasks that defined a wife's competence. In medieval households, across all social classes, wives produced and maintained the family's clothing, bedding, and household linens. For peasant and middle-class women, this meant knowing how to process raw wool or flax, spin it into thread, weave it into cloth, and then sew it into garments, a process that could take months for a single outfit. The spinning distaff became so associated with female identity that the term distaff side became synonymous with the female line of a family. Medieval women typically spent hours each day spinning thread whenever their hands weren't occupied with other tasks. They could literally spin while walking, talking, or supervising children. Even noble ladies who didn't need to produce everyday clothing were expected to be accomplished in needlework and embroidery, often creating elaborate decorative pieces for their homes or as gifts. The famous Bayeux tapestry, which isn't actually a tapestry but an embroidered cloth nearly 230 feet long, was likely created by skilled noblewomen and their female servants. Medieval people genuinely judged a wife's character by the quality of her textile work. A woman who produced even strong thread and neat, sturdy garments was considered industrious and virtuous. The Bible's Proverbs 31 woman, often cited as the ideal wife, specifically mentions her skill with spindle and distaff. Archaeological digs at medieval sites almost always turn up spinning and sewing implements, showing just how universal these female tasks were. Imagine spending most of your waking hours just making and maintaining the family's clothes. Number 6. Maintain a good reputation in the community. Did you know medieval wives basically lived in a full-time reality show where the whole town was watching and judging their every move? A wife's reputation wasn't just her own business, it directly affected her husband's standing in the community and could impact everything from business opportunities to social connections. This wasn't just about avoiding major scandals either. Medieval communities were incredibly tight-knit, and gossip spread faster than plague in these small societies where everyone knew everyone's business. A good wife was expected to carefully manage her public image, avoiding even the appearance of impropriety. Women were warned against spending too much time in public spaces, like markets or town squares, where their behavior might be misconstrued. The 14th century poem, How the Good Wife Taught Her Daughter, specifically advises young women to avoid taverns and to limit conversations with men to brief, necessary exchanges. Church services were simultaneously the most important social obligation and a dangerous reputation minefield. A wife needed to appear regularly at Mass to demonstrate her piety, but had to be careful not to dress too finely, showing vanity, or interact too familiarly with male parishioners. Getting involved in public arguments or disputes was considered especially inappropriate for wives. Medieval court records show women being publicly punished for scolding or arguing too loudly in public spaces. Some towns even had special punishment devices like the cucking stool, a chair on which quarrelsome women were dunked in water, specifically for wives who damaged community harmony. The pressure to maintain a spotless reputation was so intense that medieval wives often formed tight social bonds with other women who could vouch for their behavior and protect them from malicious gossip. A single rumor about inappropriate behavior could haunt a woman for life in these communities with long memories and few opportunities to start fresh. Number 5. Raise children properly. Think parenting is hard now. Medieval mothers did it without baby monitors, children's Tylenol, or any of the modern conveniences we take for granted. A good medieval wife was expected to bear children, preferably sons, and raise them to be productive, moral members of society. This was considered her most sacred and important duty. Medieval infant mortality rates were horrifyingly high, with some estimates suggesting 30% of children died before age 1, and 50% didn't reach adulthood. Medieval mothers lived with this constant heartbreak, while continuing to run their households. Despite this harsh reality, medieval women were expected to show emotional restraint even when losing children, with excessive grieving considered inappropriate. A proper medieval mother was responsible for her children's moral and religious education, especially for daughters who would learn all household skills directly from their mothers. Sons typically stayed under their mother's supervision until around age 7, when their education would often be taken over by fathers or sent for fostering in another household if they were from noble families. Discipline was considerably harsher than modern standards, with corporal punishment considered normal and necessary. Medieval parenting manuals actually warned against excessive affection, believing it would spoil children's character. The 15th century Book of the Knight of the Tower instructs mothers to beat their daughters, if necessary, to ensure they grow up modest and obedient. Medieval wives were also expected to manage their children's future prospects, saving for daughters' dowries and helping arrange advantageous apprenticeships or marriages. For noble families, this could involve complex political negotiations, starting when children were still very young. Even while handling all these parenting responsibilities, medieval mothers continued their endless household work, often with babies strapped to their bodies or small children underfoot. There were no designated mommy breaks in medieval life. Number 4. Show proper reverence in religious matters. Would your Sunday morning sleep-in habit make you a bad medieval wife, you bet? Religious devotion wasn't optional in medieval society. It was a fundamental part of a wife's expected duties. A good medieval wife demonstrated her piety through regular church attendance, strict observance of religious fasts and festivals, and leading her household in daily prayers. This wasn't just about personal faith either. A wife's religious behavior reflected directly on her husband's reputation and the family's standing in the community. Medieval wives were expected to know the church calendar intimately, observing dozens of feast days and fast days throughout the year, each with specific food restrictions and traditions. During the 40 days of Lent, for example, wives had to completely rework a meal, planning to exclude meat, eggs, and dairy. A truly good wife was expected to attend church services multiple times weekly, not just on Sundays. Women unable to attend due to childbirth or other duties were expected to recite prayers at home during church times. Medieval household inventories frequently included prayer books and religious items specifically for wives' use. The famous Book of Hours personalized prayer books were particularly associated with noble and wealthy women who would use them for daily devotions. Some surviving examples contain handwritten notes in the margins where medieval women recorded family births, deaths, and important events alongside their prayers. A wife's religious responsibility extended to teaching prayers and basic catechism to children and servants. She was also typically in charge of preparing the household for priests' visits, especially the important annual house blessing. Wives were expected to engage in charitable works as an extension of their religious duties, providing food to the poor or caring for sick neighbors. The 14th century mystic Marjorie Kempe described how even her extreme religious devotion, including frequent public weeping during religious episodes, caused conflict with her husband because it disrupted her wifely duties. The pressure to balance religious obligations with household responsibilities created constant tension for medieval women. Number 3. Support your husband's career. Think. Corporate wife pressure is a modern invention. Medieval wives were basically expected to be their husband's unpaid business partners, social secretaries, and PR agents, all rolled into one. A good medieval wife actively supported and enhanced her husband's career or trade, often working alongside him in family businesses or managing affairs while he traveled. This wasn't just about moral support either. Medieval wives frequently had specific economic roles that complemented their husband's work. In craft guilds and merchant households, wives often learned the family trade and could continue the business if their husband died. Archaeological evidence from medieval workshops frequently shows tools sized for both men and women, suggesting wives worked alongside husbands in many trades. In brewing, for example, alewives, female brewers, were common throughout medieval Europe, often married to men in related trades. For wives of guildmasters, social obligations were extensive. They were expected to host business dinners, build relationships with other craft families, and maintain connections that would bring in customers or apprentices. The wives of merchants had to manage household finances during their husbands' frequent trading journeys, sometimes for months or years at a time. Some merchant wives became accomplished businesswomen by necessity, handling accounts and making major decisions in their husband's absence. For noble and royal wives, supporting a husband's career meant navigating complex political alliances, hosting elaborate diplomatic events, and sometimes even acting as regents during a husband's absence in war. Eleanor of Aquitaine, famously accompanied her husband, King Louis VII, on crusade to the Holy Land. Talk about a supportive wife. In farming families, the division of labor was clear, but complementary, with wives typically handling dairy production, poultry keeping, garden cultivation, and food preservation, while husbands focused on field crops and livestock. Medieval tax records and court documents reveal that widows, often pabeling, continued their late husbands' businesses, suggesting they were already deeply involved in operations before becoming widows. Number 2. Show proper obedience and respect. Ever wondered just how far the obey part of traditional marriage vows goes back? Medieval wives were expected to demonstrate complete obedience to their husbands in pretty much everything. This wasn't just a personal preference, but a fundamental social and religious expectation. The biblical command for wives to submit to their husbands was taken extremely literally in medieval society. A good wife was expected to obey her husband's decisions without question, even when she disagreed. Medieval marriage ceremonies explicitly included the wife's vow to be bonny and buxom, meaning obedient, in bed and at board. This obedience extended to every aspect of daily life, from household decisions to personal behavior. Legal frameworks reinforced this hierarchy under the medieval concept of coverture. A wife's legal identity was literally absorbed into her husband's. She couldn't own property independently, sign contracts, or appear in court without her husband. Medieval conduct books and sermons frequently reminded wives of their duty to submit gracefully to their husband's authority. The popular 15th century text, The Goodman of Paris, advised wives to be like faithful dogs in their obedience, always ready to respond to their master's call. Physical discipline of disobedient wives was legally permitted and socially accepted throughout the medieval period. Court records show that only the most extreme cases of wife-beating were considered problematic, and even then the focus was often on whether the husband had reasonable cause for the punishment. The famous medieval folk ballad, Blow Thy Horn, Hunter, celebrates a husband's right to beat his wife with birch rods for disobedience. Despite these harsh expectations, historical records show many medieval wives found ways to exercise influence while maintaining the appearance of proper obedience. Letters between noble couples often show wives skillfully persuading husbands while maintaining a tone of deference. The 15th century Paston letters reveal Margaret Paston effectively running the family's affairs while carefully phrasing her actions as carrying out her husband's wishes during his frequent absences. Number 1. Prepare food skillfully and abundantly. Could your cooking skills keep you alive in medieval times? Maybe not. A medieval wife's reputation literally depended on her culinary abilities. Food preparation wasn't just one of many household duties. It was arguably the most important daily task that defined a good wife. Medieval wives spent a massive portion of each day planning, preparing, preserving, and serving food, often working from pre-dawn until after dark, just keeping everyone fed. This wasn't just about throwing ingredients together either. A skilled medieval wife needed comprehensive knowledge of seasonal ingredients, preservation techniques, cooking methods, and medicinal properties of foods. Medieval humorists and writers frequently mocked wives for poor cooking skills, showing how central this ability was to a woman's perceived value. The famous medieval text, The Goodman of Paris, written by an elderly husband for his young wife in the 1390s, dedicates enormous sections to detailed cooking instructions, including exactly how to determine when meat has roasted properly and precisely how to arrange table settings. Food preparation in medieval times was intensely physical work without modern conveniences. Wives needed strength to knead dense bread dough, haul heavy water buckets, and manage cooking over open hearths where temperature couldn't be easily controlled. A typical day might include grinding grain by hand, baking bread, brewing ale, the daily beverage for most families since water wasn't always safe, preserving seasonal produce, and preparing meals appropriate for the church calendar's complex schedule. Knowledge of food preservation was literally a life or death skill that determined whether a family would eat during winter months. Medieval wives used techniques like smoking, salting, pickling, and drying to create food reserves that could last for months. Medieval medical theory believed certain food combinations could cause illness, so wives needed to understand which foods were considered compatible. They also prepared special dishes for family members during illness, with different recipes depending on the specific ailment. For special occasions, a wife's culinary skills became even more important, as elaborate feast dishes displayed the family's prosperity and the wife's competence. Archaeological evidence from medieval kitchens shows just how central food preparation was to daily life, with cooking implements being among the most common artifacts recovered from household sites. Would you have made a good medieval wife? Are these ancient standards completely outdated, or do some of them still secretly shape our expectations of women today?